All right, so the 31 days of Techmas continues, and I think I'm gonna do a few videos this month where I just peruse over to Reddit, specifically the Build a PC subreddit, and where I just kind of peruse through and answer some of the questions. And then I guess if you guys go to Build a PC Reddit all the time, then maybe you can just drop a link in there for any of the questions I might have answered so that maybe they could get an answer.
Hey, Jay. Jay. Jay.
What?
We got work to do.
Yeah, I'm playing World of Warships. Yeah. World of Warships is the free-to-play naval strategy game where you command the most iconic and famous warships from World War I and World War II, recreated with stunning detail and accuracy. Build your fleet while participating in various game types while upgrading your ship's arsenal along the way. New players who sign up using my link below will receive an exclusive starter pack to get you up and running quickly by receiving 7 days premium time, 1 million credits, 300 doubloons, and the Tier 5 premium ship, the Exeter. So what are you guys waiting for? Start sinking ships with World of Warships by heading to the description below and getting your freebies. So I'm gonna go to the Build a PC subreddit because I feel like there's a lot more beginner builders or newbie builders down there that might have what seem like simple questions that if they took it to PC Master Race, they'd probably get ripped alive for not being, you know, uber super elite Master Race guy. So anyway, this first one kind of caught my attention. This was posted 9 hours ago. It's called Buy a 4090 or Nothing. There's no other way, bro. So the post says, that's what I've heard as a newbie in several tech discords. First of all, yeah, tech discords. I'm not gonna get into it. I am very inexperienced when it comes to building PCs, and unfortunately I don't know much about them. And while I was looking for help on the internet, as I don't know anyone technically in real life, he means technically inclined, I assume, I was told several times there's no other options but a 4090. I'm kind of wondering which tech discords these were, because I've never heard that. I've never, even in the comments of our own videos, seen people say 4090 or nothing. In fact, we see a lot of like, why the hell are you wasting money on a 4090 type of comments. He moves on to say he's upgrading from a 7700K and an RTX 2070 Super to, and he says the 4090 in his country is around 2,200 euro, whereby the 4080 costs 1,100 to 1,300 euro and is almost double the price for 30% more power for what I got told. So that's about right. It's about 30% more powerful than a 4080, and it's way more expensive, and as he's showing here, nearly double the price for 30%. That's mathematically dumb to do that, okay? The only reason you'd ever get a 4090 is you're like, I want the biggest, the baddest, and the best at all, like, diminished returns. That's the only reason you would get a 4090. He says an XTX 7900 is unfortunate. It's not an alternative because he wants to use RT and DLSS. Is a 4080 really bad for a guy to buy for price to performance if he plays 1440p? First of all, he could be doing like a 4070 Ti at 1440p and still have great performance for all of the functions that he's wanting to use here, DLSS specifically. I, for one, feel the 4080 would be a good card if he's not concerned about spending $1,100 to $1,300 on a card. That most people are gonna spend $1,000 or north of $1,000 or 1,000 euros or whatever your currency is, that equates to about 1,000 USD or more. In this case, 1,100 to 1,300 equates to more like $1,600, $1,700. So it's expensive. He's making a significant investment into this computer. So I would recommend the 4080 if he's looking at hanging onto that card for 5+ years. Now he's got a 2070 Super. That's already a 5-year-old card. So it's obvious now that he looks at probably around a 5-year upgrade cycle. The 4080 is definitely a beast of a graphics card. Personally, it should be priced more around $999, not $1,100 to $1,300, even USD. If he's looking at just a bang for the buck upgrade that's gonna allow him to really dive into better RT performance, because remember the 2070 Super is a 1st gen RT core, 2nd gen DLSS or Tensor core, and it gives you the ability to turn on certain functions, but it's not great at those functions. Now the 40 series is 3rd gen RT, 4th gen DLSS or Tensor cores. It's a significant upgrade for just about any 40 series card when it comes to ray tracing. If you wanted to save even more money, I would say maybe even consider the 4070 Ti, which I think would be plenty of performance and still at 1440p give him 100+ FPS in many games. So if he's looking to just, I want to build a high-end computer, and the budget is okay, get a 4080. I would highly take anyone's advice that's saying 4090 or nothing, bro, and just literally put them on a list of do not listen. Just ignore their advice moving forward forever. One thing they didn't mention here though is that the upgrading from a 7700K, they didn't say which CPU they're going to. Keep in mind too, you're gonna want a pretty high-end CPU in terms of like at least an 11th or 12th gen Intel, or at least I personally think an AM5 type CPU. I think is there a mention of going for, no, I read a post where someone was looking at 7800 X3D. You can still bottleneck CPUs pretty easily with a 4080 if you go too low. So make sure you don't spec too low on the CPU, like a 7800 X3D or an Intel like 12700K plus, you should be okay. All right, so this one says, what happens if I start PC without an OS? It's funny because this actually really ties into the video that we've done talking about what to do after building your tower. I'll try to remember to drop a link down here, but this is a pretty common question people ask. Like, hey, it says, hello, my PC will arrive today and I was wondering what would happen if I started it without an operating system. Will it start in the BIOS automatically or will I have to get into BIOS manually? Will I F something up or will I just turn it on if I just turn it on? You have to turn it on to ever install the OS to begin with, so you can't hurt it by just turning it on. I just want to throw that out there right away. I'll just push buttons until I get into BIOS manually. Okay, the delete key is all you need to know. Delete key is how you get into BIOS. However, on the first boot, it's gonna probably bring up like a Megatrends type screen that's gonna then show you like push F1, new CPU installed, et cetera, which will take you right to the BIOS. And if you don't have a bootloader on your drive, which means when you install the OS, it will also partition off part of that OS and create a bootloader, which basically tells the BIOS, like, here's all the boot information for the OS on this drive. If that doesn't exist, it just goes right to BIOS. Like, it'll just go into BIOS, you could turn it off, turn it on, it'll just go right back to BIOS. So until you install an OS, that's all you're gonna get is a BIOS screen. And that's usually all you need to just make sure and verify everything's running. Because in the BIOS, you can see the graphics card that's attached. If you have an image and you're plugged into the graphics card, you know obviously it's working. You can make sure all your RAM is present and that your drives are present. If your drives aren't showing up and you have NVMEs, if you're running on an older motherboard, you might have to go in and configure the NVMe and turn it on. Turn on the NVMe function. Otherwise, that's it. It's pretty simple. But that's why Build a PC is actually a Reddit worth going to answer some of these questions, because that's a very basic question that I guarantee you might have gotten beaten up in other forums or Discords or whatever by asking such a simple question. Should I upgrade to Windows 11? The term upgrade is probably not one you would want to use in this, because Windows 11 really is like a skinned UI over 10. And they're very similar, actually. There are some games / drivers / graphics cards now that are kind of requiring Windows 11. So whether or not you should move to Windows 11 is going to depend on whether or not any of the programs or drivers that you're trying to use are specifically going to require Windows 11. What do I mean by that? Well, some CPUs require Windows 11, like the AM5, AMD CPUs tend to really be recommended to run on 11. That's just because of the upgraded scheduler in there, knowing how to handle the chiplet design for all the different CCXs and CCDs found on multiple chiplet AMD CPUs. Specifically, Intel now requires Windows 11 for the scheduler for the E cores and P cores. So what we found, if we ran like a 12th gen CPU or higher on Windows 10, the E cores and P cores were not assigned properly to various tasks. So the idea between the efficiency cores is that it would handle lighter background tasks while the P cores would handle more demanding tasks in the foreground, essentially giving you like a dual CPU setup without the scheduler being able to properly identify those E cores and P cores and divvy them out the workloads. It just sort of sometimes didn't use E cores at all or didn't use P cores at all, depending on what the task was that was being assigned. Now those were the early days when it first came out. It might be better now, and there might be some Windows 10 support, but still both companies are recommending Windows 11 for these newer CPUs that both AMD and Intel have come out with. So it's really more of a question of, is it required for your hardware, than whether or not you should do it. Okay, 3080 10 gigabytes of VRAM, that bad? Any other alternatives? Well, after buying a secondhand 6800 XT that died on me in just over a month of use, I'm looking for a graphics card around the 450 to 500 USD mark in my country, used or brand new. I'm looking at the RTX 3080 10 gigabyte variant. To be fair, that's just the normal one. The 10 gigabytes the normal 1080. They came out with a 12 gigabyte version later, but the 10 gigabyte is just the normal one. So just want to point that out. So skipping down, he says, I'm probably going to use my next cards for 2 years before selling it and buying a newer card again. So he's got a 2-year cycle here. And I think how often a person wants to upgrade is the very important key information on value and value proposition. So he says, with that said, within the next 2 years, do you guys think that the 10 gigabytes of VRAM on the 3080 will be enough, or should I be cyberbullied again by this sub about bad investments? What was I just saying? To buy something like a 6800 XT, 6800, 7700, hell, maybe even an A770 just for the fun of it. Don't get an A770 if you're comparing a 3080. So already the 1080 or the 3080 10 gig is leagues beyond what you need, and will last you leagues more than 2 years from now, even though it's already more than 2 years old. It came out in 2020, September of 2020. So it's a 3-year-old card, over 3 years old. 1080p, I mean, just get the 3080. Just get the 3080 10 gig, don't worry about it. Like you've already kind of alluded to here, just ignore the elitists on here, and yeah, the 3080 10 gig is fine. I think what he's probably heard is people saying, get the 12, get the 12, get the 12. If you're playing 4K or 1440p plus with high res texture packs and AAA titles, then the 12 gig would be better than the 10, because 12 gigs of VRAM is better than 10. But it's still very up for debate on whether or not 10 is enough versus 12. Usually people will poo-poo all over 8, but a lot of times 8 is still perfectly fine. But it depends on the title and the resolution. That is the two main factors about VRAM and how much you need. What's a mistake most people make? He says, what's a mistake most people make when they build their first PCs, and how bad is this later on? I kind of talked about this in our power supply video where I showed you the 12 volt jumper rail and all that stuff on the Be Quiet Power 13 Pro, whatever, I forget what it's called, but it's the 13 Pro, Dark Power Pro 13. Sure. I talked about the fact that the most common mistake people would make is maybe undersizing their power supply at the start. And they buy one that's just big enough to be able to power their components for the foreseeable future. But like we've already seen earlier in this video, folks want to go from like a 7700K and a 2070 now to a newer multi-core CPU that was undisclosed, I didn't say what they were going to go to a 4080 or even considering a 4090. That's a significant bump in power from 8 years ago when the 7700X, or excuse me, the 7700K was a thing. I think it was more than 8 years ago. It's getting closer to 10 at this point, but I digress. We're looking at double the power needs versus back then. So if you had gotten like a 600 watt power supply, which would run that system just fine, that would not cut it for today very, very well. So, but there is a diminishing return where I wouldn't recommend running out and getting a 1500 watt power supply that you're only going to be using maybe 700 watts under load. You'd be paying for something that you probably will never utilize its full potential of. So I kind of find personally like power supplies around 1000 watts sort of the sweet spot. Another mistake people make is just completely imbalancing their system. What I mean is they'll get like a 4080, 4090, and then they'll put like a 10400 KF in their system. I've seen this. I'm not kidding, I've seen this, where the CPU is absolutely positively gonna be a bottleneck. I've also seen people get like 7950X 3Ds and then put like a 3050 in there for the graphics card. There's definitely a value and a kind of a scale you wanna keep things within. If you're gonna go high-end CPU and you're looking for the best performance possible, then you're gonna wanna pair it with a high-end GPU. Mid-range should pair with mid-range. You know, there are brackets that tend to overlap, right? You can have a decent, inexpensive CPU, like say a 7700X, right? That's like 250 bucks or 220 bucks, whatever that CPU costs. And you could put like a 4080 with it, and you would notice the 4080 would never be fully GPU bound, but you're not necessarily leaving enough frames on the table to where you just are not using the 4080's potential ever. You just crank the settings as high as you can in your game and let the 4080 do as much work as possible. Another thing people do is they build these high-end systems and then they throw crappy like 1080p TVs on them. They're like 60 FPS. I see a lot of people say, I'm gonna save money by just using a TV. And then they use like some old Philips LCD with a HDMI 1.4, you know? It's like, that's not gonna get it done. And another little PSA is if you've built your system and you have your high-end graphics card and everything in there and you have your 144 or 240,000 FPS refresh rate monitors or whatever, and you've never gone into your driver or your control panel in Windows and ever actually enabled the high refresh rate, you're at 60 FPS right now. You may not even know it. So do yourself a favor, go into your display options, make sure your refresh rate is set as high as your monitor can go. That's another mistake people don't know. Just like when you plug in RAM, it does not enable Expo, XMP, or DOCP by default. It's gonna run at RAM base speeds. So unless you go into your BIOS and enable the RAM overclocks, and yes, those are overclocks that are the listed speeds, you're running at base speed. That's probably the #1 mistake new builders make. This one says, should I get a 1080 Ti for $100? I'm not gonna read the rest. Yes. If it works, a 1080 Ti for $100, heck yeah, why not?
Like, stop typing right now. Go get it.
Is 32 gigabytes of DDR5 6000 megahertz RAM good for an i7 12700K and a 4070 Ti? The #1 comment, yes. I mean, yes, it's good. I think it's a bit overkill. I mean, it's gonna be hit or miss on a 12th gen whether or not it can run DDR5 6000 XMP profiles without crashing. But I mean, 32 gigs is pretty common these days because DDR5 sticks at 16 gigabytes are not that expensive. So yeah, I mean, if you could save some money and even go with like 5,000 or 5,200, do that. But I think this is another common mistake. People will spec their RAM really high and then they just play games and stuff. And RAM, for the most part, doesn't have a whole huge impact on the overall gaming experience. Like, I would personally take an overclocked CPU with a minimally overclocked RAM versus full RAM XMP profile speed and stock CPU speed. Bumping up the CPU will bump your frames up if your CPU bottlenecked at all, more so than faster RAM will. Do I use integrated graphics for now? Hey everyone, this is my first post here and oh boy. Welcome to Reddit. I want to build a PC, but do not have the money for my build, but I can afford a Ryzen 7 5700G now, and I don't mind waiting. I don't mind waiting until I get a graphics card, or should our IG... I'm reading it the way it's written, people. Are iGPUs just not good anymore? I could use some advice, thanks. Look, the 5700G can provide you 1080p, low settings gaming on most systems. We've done videos on this. It's probably gonna be in around the 40 to 50 FPS range at 1080p low, depending on the title. Some more demand, like Cyberpunk, you're not gonna be getting more than like 20, 25 FPS maybe. If you were gonna be playing things like CSGO, and you don't care about 400 FPS to have the best latency and click response, you can get an image and you can make things move around and you can play games. Is it gonna be a great experience? No. But is it nice to have an iGPU CPU for troubleshooting purposes later? Yes. Do I feel like if you can't afford to build the tower now, should you settle and get lower spec stuff now? The instant gratification part of me wants to say, yes, do that. But the more responsible part of me wants to say, wait until you've saved up some money to build as close to you want the first time. Otherwise, by the time you get to that point, you will have spent way more than you ever initially wanted to because of upgrading parts as you go. So you get the 5700G, you got the 5700G because of the fact that you wanted the iGPU so you could play now, but then you're gonna realize the 5700G is not that great of a CPU in terms of overall CPU power. So then you're gonna put a 3080 or 4060 or 4060 Ti or something on there. You're gonna realize you're actually bottlenecking the 5700G with a mid-range GPU. So you're gonna drop in another CPU in there, negating the cost of the 5700G. You're gonna say, but I can sell it and make some money back. And I'm gonna tell you, most people probably wouldn't buy a 5700G at any price anywhere near what you paid for it. So you're still gonna lose money. Those are the two devils and angels on your shoulder. Buy it now, you wanna play now. Don't be responsible. And the angel over here is like, be responsible, save your money and do it right the first time. So look, I'm a dad and that's what I would tell my kid. But there's plenty of things I bought now because I want it now. And then I ended up replacing it later because it wasn't exactly what I wanted. I've done that a lot.
Amazon rental service.
All right, so here's an interesting one, and we'll probably start wrapping this up. It says, upgraded to a new CPU and motherboard, but now my system is slow. He upgraded from a 10900F CPU with an Asus Prime Z490P Mobo to a 12700K CPU and an ASRock Z690 Phantom Gaming Mobo. My system is running very slow now. Games I used to get 100 to 120 FPS are now getting around 20. I feel like I might be missing something simple, so I wanted to ask if anyone has recommendations. For more context, everything used to work fine before the upgrade. I'm on Windows 10. I was thinking in my brain, has he upgraded to Windows 11 or is he on an older Windows 10? What I alluded to earlier regarding the scheduler in Windows 11 being a requirement for E-core, P-core utilization, I almost have a feeling he is running entirely on E-cores right now, because whatever games it's probably not utilizing the eCore pCore properly. He moves on to say, part of me is wondering if an update to Windows 11 could help, but I don't want to take that step or reinstall Windows 10 if I don't have to. I heard the chipset drivers might need to be reinstalled with CPU changes, but I'm not 100% sure. Well, you got a whole new motherboard. Did he just take an old OS? Yes, he did. He took an old OS, dropped it into a new motherboard, let it reconfigure devices on the first boot, and then up and running. And yes, whereas you can do that with Windows 10 and hardware that requires Windows 11, like 12th gen. It's funny that this is how we're ending this, because I started it almost with when that guy talked about Windows 10 or 11. This is almost exactly what he's dealing with right here. This is just a case of not understanding that the operating system is more than just a desktop with things to click to launch programs. It is the driver of the whole system. Right? All the drivers and everything are utilized by the OS. You have a scheduler, a task scheduler, which has to basically divvy out tasks, that's why it's called a task scheduler, to the CPU and memory and all this stuff to be able to prioritize importance and priority. So if it doesn't know what hardware is available to it and how to best utilize it, you're getting stuff like this. So update to Windows 11, I almost guarantee you your problems will get better. This is also a problem though when you take an existing drive with other chipset drivers and everything and then just plop it onto another motherboard. You have to make sure that all of the device drivers for that motherboard are correct and not just generic versions that Windows might install itself on its own to make the chipset drivers and everything work. You need to install the correct drivers on the correct OS version, which in your instance now is Windows 11. All right, there we go. Let me know if you guys like this series where I kind of peruse Reddit and find some questions and build a PC that might be beneficial to new. The reason why I'm doing this is we've been noticing views are definitely going back up. New subscriber growth is going back up. That's because this time of year, a lot of people are building computers, getting gifts for people, or just researching what they want to put on their own Christmas lists and stuff. So you're gonna find a lot of new buyers or builders and buyers that are just they're not experts at this and they don't know little nuances like this. So if you want me to continue this series, give this video a like, give us a subscribe, and then do us a favor. If you go to this subreddit, maybe plop a link to this video in there and say, hey, this stupid YouTuber guy answered your question and it's just another piece of answer that they can decide if they want to use or not. I don't know. Ooh, piece of answer. Anyway, I don't know where that came from. All right, guys, thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Mats are still on sale, 30% off.
Why are you going Morty all of a sudden?
Thanks for watching now. What happened? Uh-oh.